Wyoming Territory, July 1879. The stagecoach rattled hard over parched land, wheels bouncing against sun-baked ruts as dust swallowed the horizon. Sylvie Barrett sat rigid on the bench, gloved hands clenched tight in her lap. The air inside the coach was thick with heat and the sour scent of old leather. She caught herself glancing again at her small valise by her feet, as if it might vanish. Everything she owned was packed inside addresses folded with care, a worn Bible, and the tiny locket with her mother's picture. She had left her whole life behind in St. Louis, chasing a job offer as a teacher in Medicine Bow. A fresh start. No more looking back. The driver called something down from the front, but the wind dragged the words away. Sylvie shifted uncomfortably, the bustle of her dress sticking to her back. Across from her sat a banker from Cheyenne, snoring softly, and beside her, an older woman in mourning black clutched a rosary with white-knuckled fingers. Then the coach jolted to a stop so suddenly that Sylvie pitched forward, catching herself on the edge of the seat. "What in the—" the banker muttered, blinking awake. Outside, the sharp sound of hooves. Then voices. Not friendly ones. "Get out!" a man barked. The door was yanked open. Sunlight poured in, blinding. A rough-faced man with a rifle motioned with the barrel. "You heard me. Out!" Sylvie's heart hammered as she stepped down, skirts brushing the dry grass. Two more men stood nearby, one circling the horses, the other keeping his gun trained on the driver. Bandanas covered their faces, but their eyes showed no mercy. "Bandits. We do not have much," the widow whispered, clutching her purse. "Do not matter," the man with the rifle said. "We will take what you got." Sylvie backed toward the coach, but the man grabbed her arm. "Not so fast, sweetheart. Let her go," the driver growled. The bandit sneered. "Or what?" A shot cracked through the air. The bandit dropped where he stood, a hole between his eyes. The others scattered, shouts rising. Another shot rang out, this one taking the hat clean off the man near the horses. He bolted into the tall grass, lost in a cloud of dust. From the ridge above the trail, a lone figure on horseback guided his mount down the slope, rifle raised and steady. Sylvie stared, frozen. The man rode with lean strength, his face shadowed beneath the brim of his hat. He wore a dark duster, long legs gripping a chestnut gelding with ease. He dismounted before the coach, boots crunching against dry gravel. "You all right, miss?" His voice was low, rough with dust and distance. She nodded, voice caught somewhere in her throat. "Name is Sawyer Jett," he said, eyes meeting hers. "I was tracking those boys. Been robbing coaches all along the Laramie Trail." The driver stepped forward, still shaken. "You saved our hides." Sawyer nodded once, then turned back to Sylvie. "You hurt?" "No," she said, finally finding her voice. "Just thank you." His gaze lingered on her, searching. "You traveling alone?" "Yes." "Where to?" "Medicine Bow. I have a teaching position." He tipped his head. "Saw the coach from the ridge. Figured they would strike here." He moved with quiet confidence, checking the driver's wound, just a scrape on the arm, then helping the older woman gather her things. But his eyes kept drifting back to Sylvie. When the coach was ready to roll again, the driver looked at Sawyer. "You should ride with us, in case they come back." Sawyer hesitated, then looked to Sylvie. "That all right with you, miss?" She nodded quickly. "Please." He swung up beside the driver, rifle resting across his lap. The rest of the ride was tense, but no more trouble came. Sylvie stared at the back of Sawyer's broad shoulders, heart still rattling. She had never seen anyone killed before. Never seen anyone step between her and death without a second of doubt. By the time they reached town, the sun had dropped behind the hills. Medicine Bow was a small collection of buildings scattered along the track: saloon, general store, boarding house, schoolhouse set back in the cottonwoods. As the passengers stepped down, Sawyer dismounted. "I will walk you to the boarding house," he said to Sylvie. "That is kind of you." They walked in silence, her valise in his hand. The air smelled of sage and wood smoke. Snow still clung to the far peaks, but the town was warm. At the steps of the boarding house, she turned to him. "I do not know how to thank you." He looked down at his boots, then back up. "Just glad I was there." She hesitated. "You said you were tracking them? Are you a lawman?" "No," he said. "Just someone who does not like seeing folks hurt." There was something lonely in his voice. Something worn. "Well," she said gently, "you saved my life." His jaw worked, like he wanted to say something else, but he just nodded. "Good night, Miss Barrett." "Sylvie," she said softly. "You can call me Sylvie." He gave a small smile. "Then good night, Sylvie." She watched him walk away, his silhouette fading into the dusk, and felt something shift in her chest. Something she had not expected, not out here in the dust and wild. The next afternoon, she was standing outside the schoolhouse, sorting through supplies, when he appeared again, hat in hand, eyes steady. "I figured you might need help getting settled." She blinked, surprised. "I do not have much." "Still," he said, "I would like to help." She opened the door. "All right." They worked side by side for an hour, cleaning the desks, opening the windows, scrubbing dust from the chalkboard. He was quiet, careful in how he moved, how he spoke. But once, as she laughed at a stubborn stain, he looked at her with a warmth that made her breath catch. "You laugh like someone who has not forgotten how," he said. She met his eyes. "I try not to." He reached up, brushing a cobweb from the ceiling. "You are braver than most." "I do not feel brave." "You are here alone, starting new. That takes guts." She looked down, cheeks warm. "What about you? Where is home?" He was quiet a moment. "Nowhere lately." She turned to him. "You have no family?" He hesitated. "Not anymore." There was pain in his voice, but she did not press. When the room was clean, they stood in the doorway, looking out over the empty yard. "I would like to see you again," he said simply. Her heart beat faster. "I would like that too." He tipped his hat. "Tomorrow, then?" "Tomorrow." She smiled. As he walked away, her fingers brushed the locket at her neck. She had come west expecting hard days and long nights. She had not expected Sawyer Jett. And something told her he had not expected her either. The next morning brought a hush to the prairie that settled over the town like a held breath. Sylvie stood on the schoolhouse porch, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hammer in hand. A crate of slates and readers waited at her feet, and a wooden sign freshly painted with "District School No. 2" leaned against the wall, needing hanging. Shoes crunched softly behind her. "Need another hand?" She turned to find Sawyer standing there, hair still damp from a wash, shirt collar open to the sun. He looked like he'd ridden through quiet country before the town had even stirred. She handed him the hammer without a word, a trace of amusement in her eyes. "I was told you had a knack for showing up right when you're needed." He glanced at the sign. "I aim to keep my reputation." They worked in companionable silence, him steady on the ladder, her passing nails from the apron pocket she tied around her skirt. The hammer's rhythm echoed down the empty street. "You been around this place long?" she asked finally, brushing sawdust from her palms. "Few seasons here, few there." He adjusted his grip. "Worked cattle south of Rawlins. Built fence through the bighorns. Never stayed too long." She leaned against the porch post. "That why you ride alone?" He paused, hammer held mid-air. "Not always by choice." The wind lifted her hem slightly, and she stilled it with a hand. "What made you stay here?" He drove the nail home before answering. "Didn't plan to. But then the trail turned, and I didn't feel like riding past it." She looked up at him, something warm threading beneath her ribs. They spent the rest of the morning rearranging benches, sorting books by age group, and uncrating a globe whose paint had begun to flake around Alaska. He was quiet most of the time, but not distant, just careful with his words, like someone used to being misunderstood. When they stepped outside again, the sun had climbed higher, and the scent of pine smoke drifted from somewhere nearby. "You eat yet?" he asked, tightening the strap on his saddle. She shook her head. "Haven't had the chance. There's a woman down on Willow Street sells meat pies from her back porch. If you're not afraid of sitting in the shade with someone who doesn't talk much." She considered him for a moment. "Sounds better than eating alone." They walked together beneath the cottonwoods that lined the road south of the tracks. The town's few children wandered between houses, kicking stones or trailing sticks through the dust. A pair of ranch hands passed them, tipping their hats, eyes flicking between them with quiet curiosity. At the pie seller's porch, they sat on a split-log bench while an older woman brought them 2 small plates, each with a peppered crust still warm from the oven. Sawyer cut his with a pocket knife, quiet as ever. She took a bite, then glanced over. "What do you see when you look at people?" He didn't look up. "Truth, mostly. Or what they're trying to hide." "And me?" He met her eyes. "You're holding something tight. But you haven't let it change what's good in you." She blinked, the crust suddenly dry in her mouth. "You don't speak like someone who's run from things," she said. "I've run far enough to recognize when someone else is trying not to." She looked down at her lap, then back up. "There was someone. A man. His words were kind, till they weren't. I left before I stopped believing my own worth." The only sound was the creak of the porch as someone stepped inside. "I'm not sorry you left," Sawyer said quietly. "Because now you're here." She looked at him, searching his face for some trace of intent beyond kindness. But all she saw was steady certainty, like the earth wouldn't shift beneath her if she stepped closer. They finished their meal in silence. When they rose to leave, he walked her back to the schoolhouse, stopping beside the steps. "I've got a job up near the hills tomorrow. Checking fence lines for a rancher who doesn't ride so well anymore. Might be gone a day or 2. "That's fine," she said. "I'll be here." He hesitated. "You mind if I come by after?" "I'd like that." He tipped his hat, then turned. She watched him go until the bend in the road swallowed him. Once inside, she opened the window above her desk and let the breeze wander in. The room smelled of chalk and sun-warmed pine, the scent of something beginning. And for the first time in longer than she could name, she wasn't looking over her shoulder. 2 days passed before she saw him again. Sylvie had just dismissed the children from their first morning session, 7 boys and 3 girls, each with grass-stained knees and varying degrees of patience, when Sawyer rode down the lane beside the schoolhouse, his gelding's hooves muffled by dry earth. He swung down without hurry, dust on his trousers and a fresh tear along the cuff of his sleeve. "Fence held, mostly," he said. "Couple posts loose. 1 steer wandered off near the creek." She studied his eyes, sun-shadowed but alert. "Did you find it?" He nodded once. "Grazing where the water runs long. Took me most of yesterday to coax it back. Was it worth the ride?" He leaned against the hitch rail, arms crossed. "For the coin? Maybe not. For this moment? Likely so." Her pulse quickened at the ease of his words, so unlike the reticent man who had first stepped off the ridge with a rifle and quiet purpose. She brushed her fingers along the porch rail, then said, "I've been learning the children's rhythms. Some read better than they speak. Others speak more than they listen." He smiled faintly. "Sounds like most folks, grown or small." She stepped down from the porch, walking with him toward the cottonwood that shaded the schoolyard's edge. The breeze tugged at her hem, and dry leaves whispered overhead. "Do you miss cattle work?" she asked. "I miss the silence," he said. "But not the long nights or the loneliness that comes with them." She glanced sideways. "You ever think of settling?" He took a moment before answering. "I've thought on it. Just never had reason that stuck." She lowered her eyes. "And now?" He looked out over the prairie, where the land stretched soft and gold beneath the sky. "I've been wondering if peace is something a man finds, or something he chooses." She said nothing for a time, only stood with him beneath the shifting leaves, letting the quiet speak what neither of them had learned how to shape yet. At last she said, "There's a social gathering this Saturday, behind the chapel. A harvest supper. Pastor's wife asked me to bring biscuits and stay long enough to smile at strangers." He turned slightly toward her. "You planning to?" "I might. If there's someone I'd rather speak with than all those strangers." His eyes met hers steady. "Then I'll be there." She nodded, and they walked slowly back toward the steps, the late morning sun warming the boards beneath their feet. Before he left, he reached into his saddlebag and brought out a folded cloth parcel. "Found this in the hills," he said. Looked like it belonged in gentler hands. She opened it carefully. Inside lay a pressed wildflower, pale blue and delicate as breath. Its stem had been wrapped with a narrow strip of leather cord. She looked up, startled. "You kept it from wilting?" He shrugged. "Only barely." She held it close, brushing a thumb across the brittle edge. "Thank you." He tipped his hat, then mounted. "Saturday," he said, and rode off with the sun behind his back. That night she placed the flower inside the Bible on her nightstand, between Psalms and Proverbs. She did not read either. Instead, she ran her fingertips along the page's edge, and listened to the wind pressing soft against the windowpane. The sun had begun its slow descent when Sylvie stepped onto the chapel lawn, gingham skirts brushing the tops of her boots. The scent of roasted squash and sweet bread hung thick in the air, curling from cast iron pots and open ovens behind the parsonage. Wooden tables had been set along the edge of the field, each covered with rough linen and chipped crockery. Children chased one another between the tree trunks, their laughter a high, bright ribbon through the gathering murmur of voices. She carried a tin of molasses biscuits, wrapped in a muslin cloth she hadn't used since Missouri. Inside the chapel, lanterns had been lit early to chase off the dimming light. She hadn't expected the nerves, the flutter of it in her chest, but she knew who she was looking for. She found him near the water pump, sleeves rolled, a linen collar she hadn't seen before resting open at his throat. His hair was still damp from washing, and his boots bore the scuff of recent riding, though he stood easy, hands tucked in his pockets as if the crowd meant little to him. "You came," she said, stepping close. "I said I would." He looked at the tin in her hands. "You bring enough to keep the whole town happy?" "Only if they're small eaters." He took the tin from her, brushing the edge of her fingers. "Then I'll make sure I get mine before the preacher's boys eat it all." They walked together to the tables, and she noticed how the townsfolk greeted him with nods and quiet words but didn't linger. Respectful, but wary. She leaned closer as they reached the food line, voice low. "Do you always keep folks at a distance?" He didn't look at her, just reached for 2 tin plates. "I've known the cost of getting close." She took 1 plate, then waited. "And now?" He passed the ladle over the stew pot. "Now I'm learning the cost of staying apart." They found a spot near the edge of the yard, beneath a white pine that caught the last of the light. The bench creaked beneath their weight as they sat, knees nearly brushing. She watched him eat with quiet efficiency, but there was no rush in it. Just someone used to silence. "I've been thinking about the school," she said, breaking a biscuit in 2. "The older boys have calluses on their hands. Some of them are driving stock before dawn." He chewed slowly, then swallowed. "You plan to keep them in after dark?" "I plan to teach what I can between sunup and chores. But it's not enough. They need more than letters." He tilted his head. "What are you thinking? Maybe I hold lessons twice a month on Saturdays. Just the boys. Practical things. Ledgers, measurements, trade routes. Give them something they can carry." He looked at her with something close to admiration. "You think that far ahead?" "I've had to." He wiped his hands on a square of cloth. "If you ever need help with that, I can't teach from books, but I know a bit about trail routes and supplies. What a man needs to carry to stay fed through winter." She looked at him, surprised. "You'd offer that?" "I wouldn't say it if I didn't mean it." The music started up near the chapel, fiddle and banjo weaving a steady rhythm. Folks rose from tables, couples shifting toward the cleared patch of grass at the center. The preacher's daughter pulled a young ranch hand forward, giggling. Sylvie stood slowly. "Do you dance, Sawyer?" He glanced toward the music. "Not in years." She extended her hand, palm up. "Then it's time you remembered." He hesitated only a beat before taking it. His hand was warm, calloused, steady. They stepped into the circle, and the world narrowed to the crunch of gravel beneath their boots, and the sure movement of his arm at her back. He moved carefully, letting her lead when the steps faltered, never letting their rhythm break. "You're better than you let on," she said, breath catching. "I've had a long while to forget. But I remember now." They danced 2 songs before the tempo sped and the younger couples took the floor. They stepped aside, breath mingling as they stood close beneath the branches. "Can I walk you home?" he asked. "I'd like that." They left as the lanterns burned low, the music trailing behind them like smoke. The road to the boarding house was quiet, and the moon hung low, casting soft shadows across the dirt and grass. When they reached the steps, she turned toward him. "I don't know what this is yet," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm not afraid of finding out." He met her gaze, his hand brushing hers, slow and certain. "Neither am I." She stepped closer, resting her forehead lightly against his chest. His arms came around her, not tightly, but with the kind of stillness that held more than words ever could. She stayed like that for a long moment, the night quiet except for the wind through the cottonwoods. When she finally looked up at him, she didn't speak. She didn't have to. He leaned in, and their lips met, tentative at first, then sure. A quiet promise sealed beneath the Wyoming stars. And nothing in her life had ever felt more certain. The first frost came early that year, dusting fence posts and window panes with thin crystals that turned to vapor by mid-morning. The school bell had been quiet 3 days running. Sylvie had dismissed classes when the first child arrived with a fever, and 2 others followed with the same. She'd spent the week tending them with herbs and boiled cloths, walking house to house with a satchel of willow bark and patience that seemed to grow out of the stillness she'd found in Medicine Bow. Sawyer knocked gently that morning, just before the sun cleared the rooftops. "You been sleeping at all?" His voice was low, his eyes careful. "Here and there," she said, tightening the shawl around her shoulders. "Most of the children are mending. I'm more worried about the youngest McCrae girl, her breathing's shallow." He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, setting a bundle of firewood near the hearth. "How long's she been like that?" "Since yesterday. I sent for the doctor out of Rawlins, but he won't be here until morning." "I'll ride out to the McCrae's with you," he said, already unwinding his scarf. "We'll sit with her till the worst passes. She's not contagious anymore," Sylvie said softly, watching him set his gloves on the table. "You don't have to." "I know," he said. "But I want to." The ride out was quiet. The land had turned brittle underfoot, and the sky hung low, pale and cloudless. They tied the horses near the McCrae barn and walked the last stretch on foot, boots crunching frost. Inside, the girl slept fitfully, her mother wringing a damp cloth between her fingers. Sylvie knelt and checked the child's pulse, then added a few drops of tincture to the water by the bed. Sawyer stood nearby, saying nothing, but when the mother's hands began to tremble, he reached down and steadied them, firm but gentle. Sylvie glanced up, something unspoken passing between them. She returned to her work, but the warmth in her chest lingered. By the time they left, the girl's color had returned to her cheeks. "She'll pull through," Sylvie said as they mounted. "She just needed time." Sawyer nodded. "You're good at this." "I had to be," she said, adjusting her reins. "Sometimes there's nobody else." They rode back as the lights softened. At the stable, he dismounted and turned to her. "When this school term ends, what do you plan to do?" She blinked at him, surprised. "I don't know yet." "I hadn't thought that far." He rested a hand on his horse's neck. "I've been offered a piece of land east of town, near the bend in the creek. The rancher I helped has no sons left, and he's getting older." He wants someone to work it steady, keep the fences mended and the pasture clear. She stepped closer, the cold air curling around them. Are you going to take it? That depends, he said. I've spent most of my life passing through places like this. But I don't want to pass through you. Her breath caught. She looked at him, really looked. The quiet steadiness. The way he never reached for more than was offered, but never backed away from what needed doing. I don't want you to pass through me either, she said. His hand found hers, fingers rough with work but warm. You don't have to decide now. But I'll be there. If you want to build something that lasts. I do, she said softly. I really do. He leaned in, slower this time, not with urgency but with certainty. Their kiss was quiet, but it held the weight of every moment they hadn't spoken aloud, the shared silences, the glances, the steady presence that had grown into something unshakable. Winter laid its breath across the land over the following weeks, but inside the schoolhouse, the fire never died. Sylvie taught through the cold months, and Sawyer came often not just for the repairs or the heavy lifting, but to sit with the children, share stories of the land, and teach the older boys how to read the sky for weather. They built a new porch together come spring, one plank at a time. He showed her how to drive nails without splintering the wood. She showed him how to plant herbs that could survive the wind. By the time the wildflowers returned to the hills, they'd begun sleeping under the same roof, first out of convenience, then out of comfort, and finally, because no other choice felt right. The town preacher married them one Sunday in May, under the cottonwood where they'd first watched the children play. She wore a pale blue dress stitched by the widow who lived next door. He wore his best shirt, and the same boots he'd worn the day he saved her life. After the vows, Sawyer turned to her and said, I never expected to find home in a place. But I did in you. She rested her forehead against his and whispered, Then let's never leave it. They stayed just outside Medicine Bow, on the land by the creek bend. He built a gate from pine and carved their initials into the post. She planted rosemary near the door and hung the school bell in a tree out back, where it could still ring out across the valley. They didn't speak of the past much. It had shaped them, yes, but it no longer owned them. The land was not easy. Some years the snow came early, and others the grass didn't grow. But they endured, side by side, teaching and tending, holding each other through sickness and joy with a quiet strength that asked for nothing but gave everything. Each night, before the lamp was turned down, she'd press her hand to his chest and feel the slow, steady beat beneath, constant, like the rhythm of the land they had chosen. And each morning, she woke beside him, safe in the shelter they'd built, wrapped in the knowledge that love, once hard-earned, never needed to be chased again. And that was the life they lived. Honest. Rooted. Together.